Everybody see my screen okay? Great. So as you all know, I'm sure, the United Church of Christ has a long history of working toward addressing and advocating for an end to racist policies and practices, including systemic and institutional racism within the Christian church. In 2003, General Synod 24 adopted a resolution calling for the UCC to be an anti-racist church, stating that racism is rooted in the belief of the superiority of whiteness and bestows benefits, unearned rights, rewards, opportunities, advantages, access, and privilege on Europeans and European descendants. So Join the Movement Toward Racial Justice was featured as a new campaign initiative in General Synod 33, bringing forward this historic commitment to racial justice so that we might continue to move forward toward becoming an anti-racist church that is building an anti-racist world. Join the Movement follows a long tradition of prophetic teaching and sacred storytelling handed down from the early Christian movements and faithful followers of Jesus Christ throughout generations. Movements for racial justice are correctives to the historical and contemporary threats, acts of violence, and trauma enacted upon non-European descended Americans. The ongoing impact of racism and xenophobia requires all of us to commit to a journey of healing that can lead to greater flourishing for all. So Join the Movement is an initiative that has a lot of different components. So we wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the foundational or grounding elements that are part of the contours of what it means to join the movement toward racial justice in this particular moment with this particular initiative. So first of all, Join the Movement is a hub. It's a hub of anti-racist story sharing, resourcing, and theological reflection. You'll find that hub lives in a number of different places. First of all, on our website, jointhemovementucc.org, where you will find places where stories are being shared, where resources are being offered, everything from videos to toolkits to curriculums to help build your capacities. And you'll also find news and events. Our news pieces are really commentary on contemporary events to help us develop our capacity for creating theological and spiritual meanings in the context of our current world. So if you're looking for places where people are thinking about and talking about what's happening in the world with a theological lens around race, that is a good place to go. Join the Movement is also a network of racial justice movement makers, allies and accomplices, and anti-racism practitioners. We hope that, we know that all movements are made up of people, and these are some of the circles of people that are making up who Join the Movement is. We have the Join the Movement team, which is myself and the Reverend Dr. Velda Love, who is the lead for Join the Movement and the Minister for Racial Justice at the national setting. We have an advisory team and campaign team and ambassadors who are folks who have are volunteering their time to help make this initiative work. We also have subscribers, which could be you. You can go onto our website and subscribe to receive information about news and events in our newsletter. We have story sharers, people who are offering up stories, and movement makers, local church participants and practitioners, and finally, community and global partners. And part of our goal, our hope, is that through social media, through these different networking opportunities, we continue to build our collective power to create change. Join the Movement is also a campaign. This is an opportunity for us to participate in the redistribution of resources and to build our capacity for reparatory justice by sustaining the movement toward racial justice for generations to come. Our hope is to raise at least $8 million, half of which will go into an endowment, and half which will go toward current anti-racism work to support across the denomination in every setting. You see at the bottom there are campaign co-chairs. These are folks who are working to help spread the word about the Join the Movement campaign and helping us frame and think about what it means to participate in this campaign. So we have the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart, and Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson. Join the Movement is also a covenant. We hope that Join the Movement is more than a website or a catchphrase, but it's also a commitment to practice anti-racism across every setting of the denomination, so that when you say you've joined the movement, that means you have committed to anti-racist practices in every part of the work that you do as a community and as individuals, from how your church budget is structured to how you occupy your land to how you talk to each other at potlucks. All of those are part of the anti-racist practices that we covenant to when we say we're joining the movement. Finally, Join the Movement is a call to action. It is building on the revolutionary work of freedom-making ancestors. We are intending to cultivate intersectional movements with healing and repair at the center that allow us to align with the movement of the Spirit toward justice. We hope that this is not something that we say we are and then never visit again, but it's something that we're acting toward and moving toward every day. We know that throughout history, there have been so many stories that have gone untold, so many hidden histories, so many stories coming out of communities that we haven't listened to, stories of cultures whose spirituality and faith practices predate Christianity. And we know that the movement toward racial justice relies on all of these stories. It relies on all of these stories being heard and appreciated and allowing these stories to transform us. All of the stories that have been untold and that we are excavating in this work are intended to open our hearts to see the world through the eyes of love and dream a future for descendants yet to come. I want to share with you a little reflection from one of our advisory team members and ambassadors, Reverend Amanda Hendler-Voss from Washington, D.C., as she talks about what Join the Movement means to her.
I'm grateful to the Join the Movement campaign because we know that this world is split and we are called to mend it. And you are stitching together stories of, what happens in Washington, D.C., with stories of churches in the South, with stories of churches out West and in New England. And we need that stitching. We need to hear from one another. The stories that I hear about work that other churches are doing, that inspires me and encourages me and bolsters me.
So here are some ideas for ways you might get involved in Join the Movement. You can sign up for communication with us at jointhemovementucc.org. You can contribute or connect us with stories from your communities. We really want to hear from you and about the work that you're doing and what you're learning. And I want to emphasize that those stories don't have to be like success stories, or they don't have to be big stories. Like, there are lots of practices of anti-racism that are small. And one of the things we learn in anti-racism work is to also pay attention to the things that don't go well, the places where we fall short or we fail at something, because those are learning opportunities too. So I invite you to really think about if there's a story that you could share that would be an inspiration or encouragement or challenge to other communities. We invite you to use our resources to practice anti-racism in your organizations and communities, and tell us about what you're doing. And tell us what you need for your anti-racism work and help us create it. We also really invite folks to create partnerships with and support the work of racial justice organizers and advocates in your community, and help connect them to this initiative and to the United Church of Christ. And finally, we invite you to donate to the campaign, and invite others to donate to the campaign as part of your involvement in the Join the Movement. There are some upcoming events I just wanted to let you know about. I hope all of you will come register and come to our Juneteenth celebration on June 17th at 12 Eastern Time. It is around the theme of revealing hidden histories, and will feature a number of different speakers and performers and artists from across the denomination, including Dr. Renee Harrison, who wrote the amazing book, Black Hands, White House, about the history of slavery and the building of Washington, D.C. and the country in general. So Renee will be with us to help us think about hidden histories. Over the summer, we'll have a couple different events happening. One is an anti-racist storytelling workshop called Tell Me a Story. And we're also doing a movement maker retreat called Streams in the Desert. Some relief for those of you who are in the work and need some moments to care for yourselves. And then in September, we'll have our second of our storytelling and racial justice webinars. That's called Learning from Many Stories. It will feature storytellers from a number of different cultural traditions, and invite us to think about the anti-racist practice of disrupting the notion of a single story. And if you know the amazing work by Chimamanda Adichie, in her TED Talk, she talks about the danger of the single story. So this is an invitation for us to think about how we learn from many stories. So we always like to emphasize that the Christian church began as a movement toward a more just world through the teachings of Jesus. And we hope that you will join this movement toward racial justice, and become part of the way in which the Spirit is working out love and justice in our midst. I invite any questions, any comments, any thoughts, anything you want to know about Join the Movement that you didn't hear.
Sharon, just a logistical kind of helping folks keep these things on the radar. I'm guessing, and I've noticed along the way, that through the national email alerts or whatever, that if you're signed up to those more generally, will you get these updates, or is it important to actually go to the Join the Movement site so that when these special events come up, folks get word about that?
Yeah, they will. We always intend to cross-pollinate. So you should receive them if you get information from the UCC. But there will be things, I think, that come up in a more timely way that if you're not signed up for our alerts, you might not see. So I just really encourage you to go on to Join the Movement, ucc.org, and enter your email. We don't send a lot of stuff. We're not going to flood your inbox. We do like a quarterly newsletter and some other kinds of action alerts, but that's really mostly what we're intending it for. And we're going to be launching in a few months our own social media, so that will be also a good place to stay in touch with us.
Question. What you've been talking about so far structurally seems to be a national perspective. Are there local chapters or groups that are coming out of this that are, taking this back to their individual areas? And is there anything, if so, is there anything like that in this area?
That's a great question. Our hope is that that will definitely happen. I think we're sort of in the building that stage. Okay. So it'll be, I would love to hear how the Heartland Conference might be taking, or other conferences or associations that you're affiliated with might be taking some of these ideas and creating your own kind of hubs of story sharing and networking connected to this initiative.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question about how we got to where we are now.
Sure.
I was under the impression that there was I mean, I know there still is a curriculum, but it was, I thought, a more do-it-yourself accessible thing initially, and now it seems to be more, you need to sign up and find a facilitator, do a retreat kind of thing, but which is all well and good, apart from the fact that I was looking for something for my local congregation to start with and engage with. I wasn't finding that through the website. So I'm just wondering what resources there for those kind of first steps we want to explore and be a part of this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, the Racial Justice Ministries has focused on the Sacred Conversations to End Racism curriculum that it requires training as for facilitators. So one thing we might be able to do is help find facilitators who are near to you that could start that journey with your community. But I think there are also other tools on Join the Movement that are trying to kind of meet people in different places on their anti-racism journey. So the Join the Movement, while it's a partner with Racial Justice Ministries, is also its own initiative. So thinking about it as kind of a continuation of some of those pieces from Racial Justice Ministries. So I'd really just encourage you to look at the Join the Movement website and see what you see there for resources. And if you're not finding what you need, let me know, because that's really helpful information for me. And then we can start building those toolkits and curriculums that you're looking for to help your community along.
Yeah, as I looked, I didn't see anything that was sort of start here.
Like 101.
Yeah, kind of a 101,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
So you want to start a conversation about race in your congregation.
I love it. So you want to
something like that would be really helpful.
That's great. That's really good to know.
Just give you kind of an outline, and then especially if it was designed to, and this will open up doors to the further exploration with Join the Movement.
Great.
I mean, otherwise we're doing a book study, we're doing our own conversations, which is all healthy and good, but it's not joining the movement, right? Because it's and so if the first step is going all in, I think it's harder to get people from square one. That's where I'm looking.
Thank you. I really appreciate that feedback, and I will start working on that.
I'm a little confused because I think that's what we're doing right now, folks.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
Trying to do right now, now this evening.
Exactly. Well, and that's why I think it's 3 or 4 members of my congregation are here tonight.
Awesome. That's great.
From Maine, because and that's the thing. I mean, it's a gift of the technology that we can do this. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be close geographically. It just has to be accessible.
Yeah.
To us. Yeah.
Awesome. Good.
Sharon, I have a story.
Yeah, go for it, Emily.
This is a story of how my congregation is joining the movement. We have a group that started bottom up in my church by local people at the church. We're a mostly white congregation with some multiracial experiences among us. And we brought a group together in 2020. It just sort of started like a book study, like anything else, but the group really bonded around their shared passion for racial justice. And they said, we're going to keep going. And when we used your resources, Sharon, is not just the Black Wall Street event, which was held probably some months ago that really got some people excited. But more importantly, I used your work in response to racial justice harm that had been committed and that was known on the national scene, and that I felt a need to respond to it. So at one point I pulled prayers from the Join the Movement stuff. shared those through our local group and with the broader congregation. And so I just felt so blessed, but also I felt not alone as like a local faith leader. I will say I was like not sure what to expect from Join the Movement because I'm new at being a faith leader. And I was like, what is this? I think I see it. And I appreciate you.
Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and know that we're building too. Like this isn't, we don't have, it's not complete. It will never be complete probably. And we're doing that in collaboration with all of you. So that's great to know how you're using the resources and what resonates, what's useful to you. I really appreciate that.
Could you
had a
share a
prayer
little?
up like so beautifully written, like within a day of a tragedy that had happened, and it was so important.
Thanks, Emily.
Could you say a little bit more about how you see the storytelling concept work into, what you're doing? I've always been fascinated by the whole idea of storytelling. I think it's something that's really missing in our communities today, and looking for ways to build it more. But what I've seen of storytelling in the past has been a very broad concept, and you seem to be narrowing it down around the racial justice issue and how you see that working.
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of two tiers that we're working on. One is the ways in which stories help us cultivate empathy across difference. And so there are ways that we're looking to tell stories that are to share stories that are about our diverse experiences, and that can be a way that folks can connect, even if you don't have immediate people in your circle who represent different cultural expressions. You can still be learning and understanding the experience of another by encountering different stories, and challenging your own preconceptions and biases and prejudices about other people, other groups of people, by encountering the realities of their lives. So that's one tier. And then the other tier is understanding that so often we hold as like central concepts and ideas, and that those don't always move us toward action in ways that are immediate. And what we're looking to do is to take stories of people doing anti-racist work as ways to, and sharing those as ways of inspiring and encouraging others' creative engagement in anti-racism. So thinking about the way that story moves us to action, and helps us really cultivate and develop our own creative skills around anti-racism. So those are the kind of two tiers that we're working with storytelling and racial justice. One is that kind of cultivating empathy, and one is helping us gain skills and capacity based on other people's experiences and be creative in our own responses to racism. Does that help, Tim?
Yes, it does. I think the third thing that I've seen with storytelling, though, is it causes a storyteller to gain additional insight into themselves. Because it and I'm not sure force is the right word, but it causes them to look at themselves and pick out parts of their life that have gone by, and suddenly see as they're speaking them how they're more relevant to the moment, and how they have some not only importance to yourself but to those around you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the invitation to self-reflection doesn't come very often, unless you're like a journaler or have some other kinds of practices. And storytelling really does give that invitation to allow you to make sense of the experiences that you've had. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Tim. I really appreciate that. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you for your engagement and your questions, and really know that my, I like to say my email door is open to you always. That's my office door, but to please reach out, ask questions, tell me what you need, help me think about what would be useful in your communities, because I think that that kind of communication and collaboration is really necessary for this initiative to become rooted in the different communities across the different settings of our denomination. So I really just encourage you to reach out if you're needing or seeing or have ideas for something. My email is always open.
May I ask a question, make a statement too?
Sure.
Don Nichols, Dover Church in Westlake, Ohio. When I first entered the ministry back in '58 at South Amherst in the church there, going to Oberlin Seminary, I had as one of my colleagues, a man who had served before me, Henry Stick, who had served in Africa as a missionary. Is it possible that our missionaries who have gone into racial situations foreign from their own racial heritage would have something to share with us in terms of how they learned and how they dealt with their own internal biases in working with Africans or Chinese? Two of my professors at Oliver College, Dr. Robert Scott, was in China, and Dr. Raymond Blakeney, president of the college, was in India and helped found one of the colleges there, I think. So are those people able to give us some insights as to how they handle interracial dialogue?
Yeah, we are working with global ministries to help cultivate stories. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. You'll see if you go on the website, there are 2 stories that are from our global ministry partners. So we have started to kind of cultivate some of those partnerships and to start accessing some of those insights. So that is there, but I would really encourage you, if there are folks that you think would be good story sharers, to encourage them to reach out and to offer any insights that they might have that might be of use to other communities. Well, I want to make sure we have some time to do some more practicing together. So I'm going to move on, but please feel free to reach out if there are other things that you want to talk about around Join the Movement. I want to move us to thinking about this idea of how do we intervene in moments of racial harm? What does it look like to lean in to those moments where something's happening and we might have a chance to intervene and create the possibility for transformation in that moment? So have any of you done bystander intervention trainings? Anyone done that? Nice, okay. So this kind of practice is based loosely on bystander intervention trainings, but is really, bystander intervention trainings often are geared toward interrupting moments of violence or potential violence. And so I'm kind of taking some of the insights from those trainings and thinking about what does it mean to do that in moments where we're talking about racialized harm, but not necessarily active violence, active physical violence, I should say. Racial harm is definitely violence. So thinking about what are ways to kind of take some of those strategies and use them in moments where things are happening that we might want to or be called to address. So when we think about the way that folks talk about and where this originates in bystanders, where we think about the insights that came from studying the psychology of the bystander effect, which is a phenomenon in which the increased presence of witnesses or bystanders during a moment of harm actually decreases the likelihood that someone will intervene. So if you add to that a felt sense of a lack of skills or privilege, fragility in moments of racial harm, people are even more likely to let things go without addressing them. So we start to think about how do we shift this culture of bystander and become what some folks have called upstanders, people who will stand up in moments of harm. And an upstander, you might define as someone who witnesses a harmful behavior and makes the choice to intervene to make things better. So I think part of promoting a culture of community accountability, where we take responsibility for the harm we cause and the harm we witness in the hopes of transformation, means moving from this sort of bystander to this understanding of upstander. And there are some patterns, some steps, some practices that help us make that movement. So I wanted to just introduce to you kind of 5 steps that help us make the movement from bystander to upstander and talk through them a little bit. And then we're gonna split up into small groups and do some role plays to see if we can practice this kind of intervention. So I'm putting these in the chat so you can see them, but I'll also talk about them each. So the first step in moving into an intervention is noticing the situation, is paying attention, being aware. That is kind of the first skill to cultivate, is this attitude of paying attention, of being alert to and sensitive to what might be happening in groups around you. I think it's part of the work of anti-racism is just starting to learn to hear and see and witness and pay attention to the way that community dynamics are happening and what those might be telling us about race and racism in that particular moment. So the first step is just noticing the situation. The second step is interpreting it as a problem that might be requiring intervention. So it's one thing to be aware of what's happening. It's another thing to say, something doesn't feel right here, or that wasn't okay, what just happened. So thinking about what is it that will help you be able to recognize in those moments something as a problem. And I think that's part of what all of us are trying to do with our book studies and our video watching and our workshops, is really being better at noticing when something's a problem. So I trust that you all are doing a lot of that work already to sensitize yourself, to help yourself understand that something that's happening in your community might be requiring intervention. The third step is to assume responsibility. It is often the hardest part from moving from bystander up to upstander, is to think that you have a role to play in the transformation of what's happening in that moment. So being able to think about and consider, what is your call in this moment? What is it that you might be responsible to in these moments of racialized harm, and assume some responsibility for the way in which the group process is unfolding in whatever context that might be. The fourth step then is deciding how you might help, to think about what is the best way to really wonder for yourself through a few steps. And then finally, the last step is to take action. So those last 2 steps, deciding how to help and taking action, are the hard ones, right? I mean, they're all hard, but those I think are particularly the most opaque, at least for me. So I wanted to offer a little bit more insight from a person who writes about kind of what it looks like in particular ways to hold others, to bring accountability into a community. And I'll send a resource after our gathering that has the fuller article that these steps are taken from. But when we think about steps 4 and 5, some of the questions you might be asking yourself are, what method of communication might be best? So is this a thing that needs to be addressed in this particular moment by talking to directly in the group? Is this something that you want to pull someone aside to say in private? Is this something that you want to follow up with an email the next day? Is this something you want to pick up the phone and call about on your way home? Like, all of those are good questions about what would be the best way for this to be an intervention that is transformative. And then when you're having this conversation, to really be specific about the action and try and explain why it was harmful or oppressive. So it's not just saying, don't do that, or don't use that word, or whatever it is, but help people understand why that might be harmful or oppressive. And then finally, be willing to discuss the action, or if you're not in a place to be able to discuss it, to point folks to other resources or suggest other conversation partners. There may be things that, because of your own history, your own experiences, that you can't be the one to help someone learn. And that's a really good knowledge to have, to know what your limits are and your boundaries are, but to be able to say, here's this other person you could talk to, or here's this website, or here's this video you could watch, or this TED Talk, or this movie, to help you learn more about this. So those are the kind of steps to move through, and some suggestions for how to flesh out those contours. And what I want to invite us to do now is to split into some small groups and take about 20 minutes to work through some scenarios. These scenarios kind of lay out, like, this thing just happened, or this thing just got said, and then invites you to practice, to actually go through the process of, what would you say? How would you intervene in that moment? And then each scenario has different kind of ways that it could unfold, that it'll invite you. So it might invite you to imagine different things about the group of people who are gathered there, or different ways that things are said or not said. So there are some folks from the core team who will help kind of facilitate these conversations, just kind of guiding you through the process. But it's really up for you all to kind of workshop your way through, like, how would you do this? What would it look like? And then we'll come back as a group and just talk a little bit more about it, and see if there are other things, other questions, other things that you want to talk through together.